Well, it is 7 o'clock. I'm sure we will have a few more join us here. But Macy, why don't you want to go ahead and start? Most of you know Macy as our webmaster, and I'm sure she'll share some of her artistic um, and her gardening skills here. So I'll let Macy go ahead and talk about her experience over the last, 10 years or so, 9 years.
Well, so technically I haven't gardened that long. But some of the photos are from like 2015 because that's when it was nothing, like nothing to speak of. So I wanted to start and just talk about why I got interested in gardening. So I grew up on a farm in a rural area, kind of between Sevierville and Dandridge. And we had butterflies all the time, and we took that for granted. I mean, we didn't have to attract anything. We got the deer too. We got everything. So, I mean, I could probably see, I don't know, 50 butterflies at one time in one mud puddle, probably. It was a lot and it was beautiful. But when I moved to Knoxville, I was like, I don't see anything but squirrels. I don't have anything. I don't see butterflies much at all. Like, I think I would see like one or two stray butterflies, and they were always flying away. And I'm like, where are you going? Like, why don't you stick around? And clearly, I had forgotten anything I had learned in school about the life cycle of butterflies and what they need, right? So, and it was probably just barely touched on in school anyway. So I didn't know how to attract them. So I was researching how to attract butterflies because that's what I was obsessed with. I was obsessed with getting the butterflies back to the garden because I would just see them fly away and I was like, why don't they want to be here? And so I found out that a lawn is not attractive to pretty much anything. And so this was late summer 2021 to give you an idea of what my garden has started to look like so you can see where it kind of ended up and where it used to be. So this is late summer 2022. I love this picture. I know there's a crepe myrtle in the middle. I have a story behind that too. Because what happened was when I first gardened, I wanted to attract the butterflies, but I didn't know about native plant gardening. And my mom got me interested in just like your basic like annuals. Like if you see in this picture, there's zinnias in it. And I still plant zinnias, don't get me wrong, but I just started with just some zinnias, Mexican sunflower, celosia, those type of things. I didn't know about native plants. And so at about that time is when I planted the crepe myrtle, in case you're wondering why I have it. And so since then, I've added red buds, American plum, black cherry, and then a bunch of other things, but we'll talk about it throughout this video. This is what I started with. And at the time, I didn't garden. I honestly never expected to get into gardening because this was before I was like, oh, where are the butterflies? What's going on? Why don't I have any butterflies? This was before I cared. Honestly, I just didn't care back then. I'm just going to be honest. I had other priorities and other interests, and I just didn't know any better. And so this is what my yard looked like kind of around the time we bought the place. Just Bermuda grass and, some weeds in the grass. And then there's a juniper, I think, some kind of, I don't know, ground cover juniper near the pole. And I think it was originally two privets, which became a problem, as you can probably guess, because we were completely novices and ignorant, didn't know how to take care of a yard, much less bushes. So these privets became trees. So those are the privets at the top of the image right now. And you can see I started to try to do something in the bottom right-hand corner. I was like, I like brick pathways. Let me just stick some bricks in the grass. And I bet you know what happened to those bricks. They buried themselves. And then I think that's phlox. I think I accidentally had a native plant from a big box store, and those phlox didn't make it. And I had a dahlia, and it actually thrived, even though I didn't know what I was doing, and I put it like right next to the phlox right there to the left of it. You can't really see it, but there's some rocks. That's where I put the dahlia. And it did great, but nothing else would live. And the dahlia was just kind of this lone flower in the middle of nothing. The bricks just buried themselves. The little solar lights just got destroyed. I mean, it was tough. I didn't know what to do. So there's my little patio on the bottom right of the screen. So basically how my house is set up is you walk down a walkway in front of my front porch, and then you can go down a hill to the walkout basement doors. And that's where I have my art studio. So the reason I bring that up is because if I'm in the studio, I have a view out of 2 glass doors to this area. So this area kind of became a focal point later on. So humble beginnings. So you can't see in a lot of these pictures the fact that I do have a garden bed up against my house. It's a raised bed, and you'll see it in some of the later pictures, but that was the only garden bed. And I started with that. I put celosia in there. I had, daylilies, which I still have, irises, a lot of non-native things, peony. I was obsessed with peonies back in the day, and so I put those in. But this was a new area. This was new territory, and I wanted to attract butterflies, but I also just wanted to try to figure out, how do I make a new garden bed? I didn't know what to do. So my first step was just to cut out a square or a rectangle out of the grass. And then I learned other ways to do it. So I tried pretty much all the different ways. So I tried leaves, and as you can see, there's like some leaves in the bottom left corner. But then in the middle of the garden, around the crepe myrtle, I have cardboard. And then in the middle of the screen next to the sidewalk, I have like probably compost and mulch, or maybe just compost, but on top of cardboard, because at the time I had no idea, hey, you can't seed your seeds on top of the cardboard when it's such a thin layer of dirt over it. So I learned that the hard way, because I was trying to plant some natives at this time. I think I was trying to plant Joe Pye weed seeds. So anyway, I was experimenting with different ways to start a garden and how to do it and how to seed into it, but still suppress the weeds, because that was always an ongoing challenge. And I think one of my favorite ways is leaves. Honestly, leaves are just so easy. I mean, some people just throw their leaves away, so why not use their leaves? And it's free mulch. And I never really had enough leaves on my property, so I ended up getting leaves from other people and bringing them in here, which can be iffy, depending on what kind of things these people are doing on their property, right? And what kind of chemicals they might be using. So maybe do that with caution, but anyway, it's just something that worked for me at the time. But here you can see there was no winter interest to speak of. There was just crepe myrtle sticks and privet trees. And then in April 2019, I wanted to expand this area. I kind of wanted to create a curve. I had a plan in my head. I knew I wanted to add a fence eventually. And so where you see this bed, there's like these little rocks. Those didn't work out. Spoiler alert. The rocks didn't work out, but it was a nice temporary path. And that was kind of where I wanted to put a little small gate. And then I wanted to put a bigger gate on the sidewalk. It didn't end up that way, but it sort of did. So you'll see later on. But so this is meant to be 2 separate sections. So the left side is actually what I call the gate garden, now that I do have a gate. And then the right side is like the interior part of the garden inside the fence. And you'll see that later on. But at this point, it was all just open and there was nothing really creating a structure. And this is when I put in Dusty Miller and sedum. I forget what that's called. Sedum, I guess. But again, I didn't really know much about native plant gardening. And so another thing I still do to this day, is I protect seeds with, I don't know, my mom said she got them from a refrigerator, like an older refrigerator, I think. But they're like these these metal grates that are used as shelves. So I just use those to protect seeds. And it works best for things that you can push in the ground a little bit, like seeds that you can plant deeper. But if you can get that grate off the ground just slightly, it does help and prevent some of those seeds being eaten by the birds and other wildlife. So if you want to make sure you're going to get some germination going, it's been helping me. So that's nice. But this is what it looked like at this time in April 2019. And then here's June 2019. A lot of non-natives annuals, and I was mixing in kale and mixing in celosia and all that because I wanted a cottage garden. That's how it all started. I wanted a cottage garden, and the natives came later. And then here's some celosia and stuff, some non-natives again. So I started out with a lot of non-native annuals, and I quickly realized that a monoculture can happen. And you can kind of feel overwhelmed with one plant. And my mom gave me seeds for this. And so I cherish this plant. Don't get me wrong. I love this plant. But I told her, I was like, Mom, these are a little invasive. I was like, this is the only plant almost in the whole garden. And it was just a funny little conversation piece, because I think this is around the time I was starting to understand the problem with like invasive plants versus native plants and everything in between. So I was starting to get a gist of what is going on here. So leaves is mulch and weed suppressant. So what I like about this, now there's always pros and cons to any mulch, because especially if you're like me and you like to do everything on a budget and you like things to reseed themselves. So mulch in general can kind of have some cons to it, but my favorite mulch has been leaves. It's budget friendly and it really creates a weed suppressant in a really good way. It's not perfect, but if you pile it up high enough, you can really suppress things until you're ready to plant. And so that's usually what my strategy has been, is either don't get rid of it unless you're ready to replace it, or suppress it with something until you can plant something there. And so the leaves have really helped me out. So this is January 2020. There's more January 2020. Lots of leaves. And here is where we talk about the rabbit stuff. So rabbits and squirrels and all kinds of things like that, they can mess up your garden on purpose or on accident. So they're part of the wildlife and I love them. So what I do, instead of trying to like scare them off, which I used to do, is I take little protective measures for new plants. So if the plant is really small, like a seedling or a sapling, something like that, and I know it's going to get chewed on by rabbits, or I know it's going to get dug up by squirrels or cats, even the cats that come around. Cats will use your new garden beds as a litter box. Trust me, I found out the hard way. So I use these little trash cans from the dollar store. I don't know if you can see them in this image, but they're on the left side of the image. They have a little rock on each one, so the wind can't blow them away. And that's what I do on like little seedlings and saplings to protect it, so that the rabbits can't just devour everything. Of course, you know, once they get big enough, then the rabbits aren't going to do much damage. But when they're really small, that's when you want to protect them. And this is also a photo of when we first did our very DIY budget-friendly fence, which is actually 4x4 posts, pressure-treated posts, and then the fencing itself is like that snow sand fencing. Because I was like, I want a picket fence, but on the cheap. So that was my little secret. And it also was probably easier for us to do because we are on a hill. It's really hard to tell in this image, but my whole garden is on a very steep hill. So here's what it looks like, or looked like in April 2020 from that upper window, and you can see the fence post going in. And this is when I had a lot of like trees kind of by themselves and didn't really have beds around the trees. So as I think pretty recently, I've started to actually put beds around the trees better, because I found out quickly that it protects the trees better if you have a garden bed around them. So that has been a newer thing that I've been working on. Okay, so here's June 2020. This is when I was still trying really hard to grow veggies with my flowers. And so you can see the lettuce in the middle of the screen near that trellis. And I don't know if I have had them in this, but I had some tomato plants on the left at some point. And then one night I saw a raccoon come down from my backyard, I guess, and run down the little sidewalk pathway right here and go right through the tomato shrub. It was just about to get dark. And the raccoon grabbed a tomato and it saw me and I was just staring at it. And then it just ran down the hill with the tomato. And I was like, I see what you're up to. But that was funny. So then I learned, okay, the rabbits like to chew twigs and things in the winter when they're hungry. And then the raccoons will take your tomatoes. But in the middle of the screen, you can see one of my favorite plants, which is wild bergamot, aka bee balm. And it really can look like a shrub. I guess it depends on your soil, but in my garden, it can look like a shrub when it actually is fully up and blooming. And then I have orange milkweed in the bottom of the screen in this image, and I have some violets in the middle near the white stepping stones, and rudbeckia in the left corner, and zinnias, which are not native, on the right side. And of course, I still had a lot of non-natives in this graphic, or in this time. And down at the bottom of the screen, you can see a squash plant. So I was really trying to mix a lot of different things together. And this is, I don't know if this was the first year, but I started growing purple passion vine. And purple passion vine, which is, I think it's Passiflora incarnata, is the host plant for the fritillary butterflies. I'm blanking on the name of the fritillary at the moment, but it's the really beautiful burnt orange fritillaries. And I am so glad I planted this plant. It does spread itself quite well, but I think it's worth it. And I have a wild garden. I don't really like formal gardens much. No, to each their own, but it's just my thing to have a wild garden. So you'll see it gets pretty wild. So this was October 2020, still had a lot of annuals. And this is when I had the gate added. I actually commissioned my neighbor to build it and I painted it. It's not painted in this image, but this is a really good image of kind of it in transition, this whole garden in transition. I had a lot of annuals and I was struggling still with the Bermuda popping up in all of my beds. And I also needed a screen from the road. So I had the arborvitaes put in, and I wanted some native hollies to go with it, but they told me that those hollies that I requested weren't available. So the hollies aren't native, and I wish they were, because I do struggle with these hollies. They're not my favorite, but the arborvitaes, I like those. I like those pretty well. And then here is what happens if you leave your stems up in the winter. I think it's way prettier than just a lawn or even a garden that's been cut down. I just think that if you leave your stems up in the winter, it's not just habitat for the wildlife, which is our most important factor, but it's also really pretty. And I think it gives a lot of winter interest, and we don't really always think about that, because we always talk about, and I say we, but just gardeners in general talk about evergreens, but even these non-evergreen things can be, even the deciduous things can be pretty in the winter. And that's kind of the same thing there, but this is when it's February and there's no snow. So, and then I had to dig a trench to get water out of my basement. So I dug a trench and I filled it with gravel. And this is an ongoing project. This is not developed. It's just a functionality thing at the moment. I would love to just have it filled with native plants too. And some are coming in. I have some asters starting currently, and I have an elderberry shrub in the top right of that now. And we've added a lot of things, I will say. I didn't know until pretty recently, within the last year or so, that you don't have to amend your soil really for native plants. You pick plants that fit your soil that you already have, right? So I used to add a lot of stuff to my soil. So I just wanted to be transparent about that. I added mushroom compost, I added regular compost, manure, and then of course leaves, which is just, natural natural leaves, but I've added a lot of things, but I guess you don't really have to if you just pick the right plants. So I was just doing this to get the garden bed started. I think I added all that on top of cardboard. So, and then in this, you just get to see the water flowing from behind my house down to the garden. Because I was like, why don't I just bring this water that is causing me trouble to the garden? So that's what that is. It was a lot of work, but my husband helped a little bit, but it was worth it. I'm glad I did it. And let's see. Okay, so I let my lawn be weedy. I don't use chemicals on it. I just let the native violets grow, and we don't mow as often as we used to. And we also don't mow as low as we used to. We used to mow really low, and we didn't want to have to mow as often. Of course, that like scalps your lawn or whatever, right? And so, but now we don't really do that so that the wildflowers can grow, especially the violets. But I know there's also these clovers that grow, and I know that they're technically invasive. But I just recently found that out. So they're in the lawn. So anyway, I think that it's great to have wildflowers in the lawn, preferably native ones. So it's great that I have a lot of violets too, but you know, if you can seed them in, that would be great. But also I just believe in reducing the lawn. So over time, I just like to add a new bed and not have as much lawn. The lawn to me is a path. I just treat it like a walking path through the garden. And I'm just going to show some images. So this is the passion vine really starting to take off on this archway. And I really love it. I just can't get enough of the passion vine. And there it is, really, really lush and starting to bloom. And then in the bottom left of the screen, I've got blue mist flower, some ironweed, and the purple coneflower you can't actually see in this image. Okay, so this is my next door neighbor's view of my garden from her front porch. I was recently on her front porch. I guess this was, I don't have a date on here, but I'm assuming this was probably August or something, this past August. And you can see the garden from her porch, and I just thought it was so pretty. And I was like, oh, I really like your view from your view of my garden. So I took a couple pictures, and that's my gate. That's what she sees. And this blue mist flower is great. I highly recommend it. It's in front of the gate right here. Actually, I have another. Yeah, there we go. So in this image, you can see blue mist flower, a young arrowwood viburnum. You can't actually see the viburnum. It's so small, but it's there. Liatris, coral honeysuckle, frostweed, and passion vine. So my goal with this was I want vines to grow that are native and that can give me some screening. And I wanted them to kind of grow together. So like one vine come from one side of the gate and then the other one come to the other side and kind of meet. And you can see the little passion fruits hanging in front of the gate. And then frostweed is a very beautiful plant. I am pleasantly surprised with frostweed. I will tell you though, it's very tall and it seeds itself very well. So if you don't want to have to deal with that, just keep that in mind. But if you are like me and you like free native plants, you know, it's going to create more of it. So it's a beautiful plant. Coral honeysuckle is one of my favorite vines of all time. It is a hummingbird favorite, and the arrowwood viburnum I'm just now getting acquainted with because I just planted it recently. It's still a little sapling, but I'm about to get blooms for the first time. So I'm excited about that. And then, of course, Liatris is a monarch favorite. Monarchs go crazy for that. So I highly recommend having Liatris around. And let's see. So here's what I mean. When I say I have a wild garden, I have a very wild garden. And I definitely don't have a formal garden. So this is the look I love. Whenever I looked at photos of gardens before I got started, they were like this. So that is why I have it this way. So that blue mist flower on the bottom left is doing a great job at keeping the weeds down. That stuff is amazing. I can't talk enough about it. Blue mist flower, I love it. And you can see another section of blue mist flower in the top of the screen. And it's next to mountain mint and beautyberry shrub. And then to the right is my tree, my big tree, which is the black cherry tree. So I chose the black cherry tree because from what I read, its mature size is smaller than oaks, but it's still big enough to be a shade tree. So I really wanted a shade tree, and I wanted it to be a host plant for butterflies. And I really wanted a host plant for the eastern tiger swallowtail. So that's why I picked the black cherry tree. And here it is in autumn 2022. And I was lucky to get to watch so many fritillaries in all life stages because of having multiple passion vines on my property. I got to see literally every life stage of fritillary, and I'm not joking. They lived in my garden fully. So that was amazing. Going from not having any butterflies, maybe seeing one pass by once a year, to getting to see the entire life stages of one main species was really, really awesome. So my goal would probably be to get to see more butterflies in their life stages. I get to see butterflies other than that butterfly, but I haven't seen the full life stages of all of the butterflies yet. So that would be a great thing to be able to get to see. But in this image, you can see, so the trees that I have are black cherry, redbud. Of course, I've got the arborvitaes. I've got the American plum shrubs. I call them shrubs, but they can technically grow to trees. And then I have elderberry shrubs. And I'm blanking on what else is in this image. Oh, and I have one beautyberry shrub, and I have 2 button bushes. And yeah, that's what I have so far. And then here's a little clip of the garden kind of, over the years as it has expanded and I've reduced the lawn. And on the left is kind of right around the time that we did the rain garden or the ditch that I had to dig. And you can see kind of what the bed lines look like, but on the right is my future plans, what I want to do. So kind of what I want to expand the beds to be like and reducing the lawn even more. Okay, so future garden bed lines, bird's eye view. So I think you could plan your garden for the future, but be flexible about your plan. My plan has changed so much over the years, but my main ideas have been the same. So my main goals are to attract butterflies and other wildlife. So at first it was just butterflies and then expanded to, well, I kind of want to attract almost all the wildlife. And my other goal was privacy. I am an introvert by nature, and I want to feel like I'm in my own little world in my garden. And so I want it to feel enclosed and private. And so that's one of my main goals other than attracting the wildlife. So think about what goals you want to set for yourself for your garden, because it's your garden and you should be able to enjoy it. So if you are more extroverted, you might want the opposite kind of garden. You might want people to be able to see you and your house from the road, and you see the road, and you be able to talk and interact with people, anybody that comes by. There's no wrong way to do that. So it's really just depends on your personality. So I would say start small and make gradual changes, because even though I think I made the mistake of starting new sections too soon before I was really experienced enough, I don't regret the mistakes because I like having all these different garden spaces. But it is a lot of work, and it is signing yourself up for a lot of work until they get established. Now, I'd say like 3 years in, you're going to see a lot of things be really lush and full and flourishing and seeding themselves, which is great. But in those first 2 years, it's going to feel really like, uh-oh, the weeds are really encroaching and I don't know what to do because I either have to put a bunch of mulch down or I'm always out there pulling weeds or, So it can be a bit of a challenge at first, but be patient with yourself and maybe start small. Having an overall long-term plan for your garden will help you make decisions easier in the present day. So if you have an overall vision, it's so much easier to be like, okay, I know what my next step is. Because if you know what you want the end result to look like or somewhat to look like, it will help you know what to do right now. I would say, and maybe it's my microclimate, but I would say only plant drought tolerant plants in containers unless you have some sort of self-watering system, because I live in a very hot, sunny, dry. I mean, I wouldn't say all the soil is dry, but if it's in a container, it's going to get dry for sure. So there's so much concrete, there's so much sun here, and I'm on a hill and it gets very windy. So I have to have plants that are drought tolerant if they're going to live in a container. Because otherwise I would have to probably water them twice a day. And I just don't want to do that, unless they're little seedlings that I'm just trying to get started. Don't be afraid to experiment with different methods of creating new garden spaces. We already kind of talked about that before. The cardboard, the mulch, the leaves, and then, herbicide too is an option. The only reason I haven't done it that way is I was trying to avoid it, but also I've used it in the past to try to get rid of the Bermuda. And although we sprayed a couple times and it did knock it back for a year or two, it did encroach back in and it's everywhere again. So like I would go out there and I would weed it and it would literally be back days later. So, and I mean, I would dig down and I would pull the roots of the Bermuda up, and I would think I had it all, and then I didn't have it all. So it just, for me in my garden, just comes right back. So don't be afraid to experiment with these different methods, because, different methods work differently for different people. And pick plants that are native that produce seeds. So this is my opinion, but I hold tight to this opinion. I like budget-friendly gardening. I like plants that are going to produce more plants. So I would say pick plants that are native that produce seeds so you can save the seeds or let them self-sow. This is budget-friendly, and it's a budget-friendly way to expand the garden. In other words, avoid cultivars or nativars that are sterile and produce no seeds, because this frustrated me when I didn't know any better and I had a native plant, but it was like one of those trademarked sterile varieties, and so I didn't realize, it's not going to produce any seeds. So I was disappointed with that. But don't let the invasive weeds discourage you, including things like Bermuda grass. Just do what you can, and remember, it will take years to develop the garden. And I think it's so easy to get discouraged because you see these weeds encroaching in, and Creeping Charlie is another one that I get like crazy. And you guys know how fast these things can grow. It can get discouraging, but don't let it discourage you. Just remember that the more native plants you plant and the more aggressive native plants you put in, the more those will outcompete these weeds. Because that's been my best strategy for getting rid of the weeds, is to just add more plants. Usually that's the solution, is just add more native plants. The next thing I would say is pay attention to your garden through the seasons. What are the little microclimates in your garden? Where does light come from at different times of the day? And how much light do you have overall? Learn your north, south, east, and west directions as part of your garden plans. I have a mostly full sun hot garden, so my plants wake up faster than typical people around here, but I also have droughts in summer, which can require extra watering, and I'm on a slope. So when I say can require extra watering, I'm talking about plants that aren't established yet. Once I've had a plant in the ground for, I even probably do a year sometimes, maybe two. When it's been in the ground a year or two, I'm just like, okay, you're on your own. So I just try to plant things that are going to work. And sometimes things will die, and then you learn what actually will thrive in your garden and what won't. And a great sign of a plant thriving is when it's starting to produce seeds and create more of itself nearby. So the neighbor on the left side of the screen here has mature trees. They have beautiful mature trees, by the way. They have oaks, they have maples, they have all kinds of things. And so in the evenings, my garden gets shaded, but it's really late in the day. So I have over 6 hours of full sun in the front garden. There are no mature trees on the other side, on the east side. So hot mornings and hot afternoons. And that is why I planted a shade tree. My number one tip is to reduce the lawn and replace it with native plants gradually, specifically host plants and nectar plants, especially keystone species. Of course, this is just my opinion because I am trying to attract the butterflies and then also attract the birds. So those are usually the things you want if that's what you want to do. Okay, now here's my controversial tip. Why not try to have a very small no-mow area where you just wait to see what natives volunteer? Some hate this idea, which I get it, but the beauty is that you can still edit it. I have a small no-mow area in my backyard that several different native plants have just volunteered in and without spending any money on those, and it reduces our mowing. We just pull the invasive plants out when we get a few minutes, which is pretty easy as long as you keep the area small. We found several native grass species such as broom sedge bluestem and some goldenrods, and pine trees and American holly in our no-mow area so far. We've also found erigeron, which I love that one. If you end up just getting invasive plants or undesirable plants, just mow or weed eat it or dig them out if you have to. The secret is to keep the no-mow area small so it doesn't become daunting to edit. So in other words, it can go wrong, but it's okay because you can just undo it, especially if it's still kind of short. So I wouldn't let it get too tall if you notice that nothing's native. But I think it's been a lot of fun because I've found a lot of native plants pop up that I don't even hear about. I think it's like some kind of grass. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it had really cool seed heads and it had really interesting leaves too. And I found out it was a native plant that I had just never heard of. So I think it's really cool to just kind of see what comes up in your backyard in a small spot. And then I recommend the National Wildlife Federation website. This link will take you to the Keystone Plants by Ecoregion. And I just picked a screenshot of the website, which shows our Ecoregion 8, which I didn't know we were in Ecoregion 8, but now I do. And these are the top trees as keystone species for our region. So I just thought that would be an interesting thing to show you. You've got the oaks, you've got prunus, you've got birches, and on and on. And then the last slide I have is just a shameless self-plug to my YouTube channel because I do make little garden tours and garden tip videos. And I have a few, not a lot, but I have a few native plant profile videos. So that's all I have. And let me know if you guys want to discuss anything specific.
Okay, so here's some photos that Donna shared from her yard. Donna, do you want to talk about them?
Sure. Twist my arm. These are, I have a ongoing love affair with blue-eyed Marys. We have 20 acres in Blount County, and these grow, well, I planted them about 20 years ago. I sowed the seed in our little valley. So our property has a ridge, and that's where our house is. And there's not much soil up there because the guy who used to live here in the 1930s, he cut all the trees and ran cows up here on some pretty steep land. So all our soil went down to the valleys. So we have good soil in the valleys. And so if I want to plant things that need good, rich soil, that's where I have to plant them. We had lived here for a while, and I had a friend who had a native plant nursery. Not make this too long of a story, but so she had these growing. She had a native plant nursery, so she had these growing, and she would give seeds. She'd collect the seeds in the late spring, early summer, and give them and sell them in packets. And so I would take the packets and I'd tuck them away somewhere, and then I'd sow them in the fall because they are winter annuals, so they germinate in the fall. But it never worked because I wasn't storing them correctly. And so finally I figured it out and did sow them, and they took off. And so now they're everywhere. I mean, they're almost at their peak right now. And they are not only on our property along our little creek, not the whole creek, but a good percentage of it. And then they're following the creek, because of the runoff, and they're on our neighbor's property, and then the next neighbor's property along their creek. And they're all mine. I should go get them back. They started at our place, but I was so happy when I had tried sowing them in some other places on our property, and they didn't take. So when I finally figured out where they needed to be, and they're really, really picky, well, let me start. They are winter annual, so they bloom in the spring, about now, and then they set seed by May, and then the seed drops to the ground, and it has to go through a kind of a ripening process throughout the summer with heat and humidity. And that's part of the whole process to break dormancy. And then once it's had all of that requirement satisfied, they germinate in the fall. Well, the reason that a lot of people can't grow these is because that's when they're breaking up their leaves, and they need to be left alone once they germinate. And even before then, because you don't want to disturb where the seeds are in the soil. So they'll be in the seed bed, and then the leaves fall down, then they will germinate. And they're just tiny, tiny in the fall, but I always look for them and I get really excited. You can hardly see them. And then they go dormant through the winter, but they're still there if you look for them. And then comes early spring or really late February, as the temperatures start to warm up, they'll start to grow again. And then they'll form flower buds, and then they'll bloom, and they grow pretty fast. Once it starts to warm up, then I'll go down there and I'll see them. And then I realize it's going to be a really good year, because I know what the seedlings look like, so I can see them all over. And so what I've learned now, though, is that if I want to collect seeds, I have to be really vigilant, because they ripen and fall within just a few days. So I missed the window last year because I had promised a friend to give her a few. I've given a couple of friends seeds, and they waste them because they don't have the right habitat. These are really, really picky. They don't like to be disturbed. They like moist bottomland, rich bottomland soils, and it needs to stay moist, pretty much when they germinate in the fall. If you have a real dry fall, then that's, impedes their germination. Although last year we had a kind of a dry fall, and this is the best year we've ever had. So they are endangered in Tennessee, and seeds are hard to come by, because in Nurturing Nature, I posted pictures of them last year, and everybody wanted to know where to get seeds. And I found one place, I think they're in Pennsylvania, but then again, you're not going to get the local ecotype. So I'm willing to kind of start the process of sharing a little bit, passing what is the word? Playing it forward, paying it forward, and gives a few people that have the right type of habitat, right type of site, some seeds, and then maybe they can share, and then they can share. We can expand, the number of colonies in Tennessee. So it's not, I don't know how endangered it is, but it's been on the endangered list for quite a while. So bees, believe it or not, bumblebees, and these are tiny little flowers. The bumblebees actually go to the flowers for nectar and pollen. And I've seen smaller bees as well, and I've never seen a bumblebee on one. I'd like to see that. But what else did I want to say about that? Let me see. I have something else. Wait a minute. Then all right, pretty much it. Anyway, the Mayapples are also increasing in number, and you can see this is their best year yet, but they're all over our property, because some of our areas we have wooded hills that are very well drained and not very moist, and the Mayapples are there too. But then we'll have kind of swales or little not really valleys, but areas that collect more moisture than the other areas on the hillsides. And so that's where most of the Mayapples are. But I'm sure more people are familiar with Mayapples than they are Blue-eyed Marys. But they are a perennial, and they will spread by rhizomes into colonies. And again, bumblebees and long-tongued bees will will eat the pollen and suck on the nectar of these flowers. And when there's only one leaf on a plant, it won't flower. So I guess it has to have two leaves. And then if you see a plant with two leaves and look underneath this time of year, you'll usually find a flower. And all the parts of these plants are poisonous, except for the fruits when they're extremely ripe. And you'll know when they're ripe because they're turn a really bright yellow, almost a translucent. The skin is almost transparent, it looks like. And they are edible. And I found actually some recipes. I've not made anything with them yet. But fortunately, the Eastern box turtles love these.
Oh, and that's so cool.
I love Eastern box turtles, so I'm always excited that they're going to have a lot to eat. I think some mammals eat them as well. But yeah, but the picture there on the middle picture is, and I took these today, the open flower, and then these two on the right, those are two different plants. That's why there are two flowers. You only get one flower per plant. And you can see the fruit is starting to form on those. So it's going to be a good year for turtles. And let's see if there's anything else I jotted down that I wanted to tell you all. Let's see. Okay, yeah. If you have conditions that Blue-eyed Mary likes, chances are the May-apples will like those areas too, because they like the moisture and the rich soil, but they're a little more tolerant of drier conditions. So if you have May-apples growing somewhere and it's kind of in a higher area and more well-drained area, don't just assume that Blue-eyed Marys will do well there, because they're a little pickier about their preferred habitat. So I guess that's all. Anybody have a question?
I was going to mention, Donna, I don't know if you've ever tried this. I don't have the amount of Blue-eyed Marys that you do, but I do have some. They transplant very easily. And so rather than trying to collect seed, I will transplant them before they go to seed and just kind of baby them and make sure they're okay. And then I've gotten them started in different locations that way, just letting nature take its course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thought. I've never tried that. But I have had some good years where I've been able to collect a lot of seed. And then I start walking up our valley, uphill. So they stay on our property upstream. And that's been successful. But some areas, and I'll sow them one year and they don't take for whatever reason. But once I know those have germinated in the fall, it's a no man's land. Nobody gets to walk in those areas. So otherwise, they'll be disturbed. So they're very picky, but it's worth it. I love these plants.
Those are beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have one other slide to show. Any questions for Donna before we? Okay. This is Gail's collection of plants that she's for her meadow and swamps. We estimated there was at least 1,500, maybe close to 2,000 seedlings that she's propagated from seed this spring. So,
that's amazing.
Not all of them go to the plant swap, but she'll have a good collection.
Wow, that's a lot of plants. So it looks like you filled your greenhouse. Your greenhouse is full, and then you've got spillover on the outside.
Well, I've got a shade cloth over it. You can kind of, this is the far left is the greenhouse. And then on the middle, that's outside, and you can kind of see I put a shade cloth. I'm getting them used to outside so that they can, not full sun. But yeah, they're getting there.
Wow.
Any other comments or questions? Anybody have a suggestion for what we'd like to focus on May? Okay. Well, this has been great. Just remember, Saturday, 3:30, not 3 o'clock. And wear your name tag. If you haven't gotten one, I have some for all the members. And then we'll have the board meeting after the swap. Okay. So, any other comments? Again, Macy, it was fantastic. You really
Thank
put a
you.
nice story together. You have, I would like to see your yard sometime every few years to see how it changes.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
hopefully-
ongoing.
Hopefully I'll have some shade eventually and I'll be able to grow more shady things. The only shade I have right now is actually in the backyard up against my house. So I have 3 Christmas ferns back there and some wild ginger.
Hmm.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you all on Saturday.
See ya.
Hey, all right. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Macy.
Thank you guys.
Maybe.
Bye. I just added some new original paintings to the shop. Go to macylou.com to check out the new pieces. I also have prints available as well as different categories of products. I have a $12 and under section and a $25 and under section as well because I believe every human being deserves to have art in their home and to feel cozy and comfortable wherever they live. I also have a contact page where you can easily get in touch with me at your convenience for art commissions and business inquiries. Just put a quick subject line such as, "Hey, I'd like an art commission," and then in the message section, put in detail about what type of commission you are wanting. Also, feel free to use the contact form as a way to ask any questions you may have about the art or the shop. Thanks for all of your support, no matter what form it takes. To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylou.com. Thanks for watching!